paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
The Watergate scandal continues to grip the nation as the infamous 18.5-minute gap in the Nixon tape.
There was a tape.
Yeah, this tape was never subpoenaed. Why?
Nobody knows it exists.
I think the best course of action is that I take the tape.
I give you this tape, you splash all over the cover of the Times, it gets traced back to me in a heartbeat. You win the Pulitzer and I get indicted. No.
I think there's a motel nearby, the Silver Sands. We go there, we listen to it, we leave.
Lord Caesar, anything is possible, young lady.
I don't know how, but they know we're here.
Hey, who is they?
Could be anyone. Could be the FBI, the CIA, KGB. Could be a Post reporter for all I know. We need to listen to the tape.
You know what to do.
Who is it, dear?
Oh, it's a newlywed couple.
We brought our player from home, and it was broken. We were wondering if we could borrow yours.
18.5-minute gap.
Maybe. No one is supposed to hear it.
What is happening?
Nixon.
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness.
Can't let this Watergate thing get out of our grip, Bob.
It's a drag.
Like this, Al? I pushed the right two buttons, right?
What is that the news? Are you listening to Nixon?
Soak it up. It'll soon be over.
Tomorrow, 30 years from now, I want to be remembered, Bob. You will, sir. You will.
Well, that's no good, Al.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I am talking with Dan Mirvish, the director and co-writer of 18.5. No, it has nothing to do with Fellini, nor does it have anything to do with John Holmes. It is the story of the famous 18.5-minute gap in Nixon's tapes. Kind of a comedy thriller all about politics in 1974. Had a great time with it, and I hope you have a great time listening to this interview. We talked a few years ago when you were talking about Bernard and Huey, and I'm so curious where 18.5 came from.
It really stemmed almost directly from Bernard and Huey. The last day of shooting that was in New York. We shot for a couple of days in New York on that. And that coincided almost exactly with Election Day in 2016, the presidential election in 2016. And then the next day, I was taking dailies out to show Jules Feiffer, who had written Bernard and Huey. And he lives in Shelter Island, or did then anyway, and which is at the tip of Long Island, kind of near the Hamptons. So I went out there, and it's about a 3-hour drive, and inevitably we start talking about the election and Trump, and everyone's freaking out, or some people are freaking out, some people are happy. Either way, everyone's freaking out, right? He had won a Pulitzer Prize for his cartoons in the Village Voice, largely for his Nixon Watergate cartoons. So inevitably, the conversation goes to comparisons to, what was it like during Watergate and Nixon, and will the Republic survive, and how many impeachments could there possibly be, that sort of thing. Anyway, and then after I left, and my buddy Terry was with me, and Terry lives out there across the ferry from Shelter Island in this place called Greenport, also on the tip of Long Island. And Terry runs this great motel called the Silver Sands Motel that his grandparents had built in the 50s and 60s. And Terry's been running it for about 10 years. And he's an indie film guy himself, so he's been smart about keeping it really vintage looking. And he does a ton of fashion shoots out there for like Vogue and Harper's. He rents it out. But he said, no one's ever shot a feature here. And I'm looking around and he said, and we're closed in the winter, so the cast and crew can stay here. And I'm like, well, this place is like preserved in amber in 1974, and we were just talking about Watergate. So let's make a Watergate movie here, So then it was, a challenge to figure out, well, how do you pigeonhole a movie set events that are normally we think of being set in Washington, D.C. at a seaside resort on the tip of Long Island. Well, the first thing you do is you say it's in Maryland. And so we did that. And then I collaborated with a great screenwriting partner, my friend Daniel Moya. And coincidentally, his aunt and uncle owned a diner just down the street from the Silver Sands Motel, and it was this vintage looking diner. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, that's 2 locations. Now we have to make a film. So that's kind of the proximate reason why we made this thing. But I'd had Watergate on the mind for a long time. I majored in history and poli-sci. I knew a couple people tangentially involved with Watergate over the years, and I was a Senate speechwriter for a couple of years in DC. So I really had always wanted to do something kind of DC based, Washington based, Watergate based. So this presented itself with a great opportunity.
Yeah, I was so curious why you chose a period piece. I mean, obviously, other than the setting, but there's always just so many challenges: the vehicles, the outfits, the hair, all that. But having those settings must have been such a godsend.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, you've seen Bernard and Huey, and you know that, in that film, we did about 10% of it was shot period. It was a different period. It was like the late 80s, but still, what that experience taught me is that not to be afraid of shooting period films on a low budget indie budget. Like if you're smart about it and about the costumes and and the settings, you can do it. I'm actually in the garage where I shot the subway scene in New York, where we shot a 1989 New York subway in my Culver City garage. But if you do it the right way, you can do it. So I think that kind of, in my mind, made it a lot easier to contemplate even thinking about doing a period film. And look, 90% of the heavy lifting is really the locations. And if you've got those, you're 90% of the way there. And what's great about the Silver Sands is that Terry has a friend that's run a film camp there every summer. And so there's a lot of extra props lying around, like period appropriate props, or from other fashion shoots that have been there and things like that. And so we have a great production designer, Monica Dabrowski, but for her, a lot of it was just a matter of like finding things on the property itself and putting them all in the right places at the right times. And actually one of the biggest things was building a spiral staircase that had been disconnected like 20 years ago and just kind of shoved in a loft. And that took like 3 days to rebuild. It was a big part of her job. And then getting, period things like reel-to-reel players, which we were able to find enough of them on eBay that are still working. And once we had those as kind of the hero props, we were able to figure it out from there. And then we had a wonderful costume designer, Sarah Kogan, who actually collects old patterns, old paper patterns for wardrobe. And so she would make new costumes like out of thin air, pretty much, using these old patterns. So that really helped sell everything.
Tell me a little bit about your cast, because it is just amazing. I love Richard Kind. So whenever he shows up in anything, and then your quote unquote radio cast as well, the tape cast.
So, well, Richard, again, you remember, is in Bernard and Huey, my last film. And, it was a great pleasure working with him there. He was the one person that we kind of wrote that part specifically for him, not knowing for sure that we'd get him because he's so busy. It was a matter of whether it would fit in his schedule, and it did ultimately. And so it was great working with him again. And John Magaro had worked with him once before. He knew him. But yeah, it's a terrific cast. I mean, the live cast is Richard and John Magaro, Willa Fitzgerald, who a lot of people know from Reacher, that was just on Amazon. But this was before we shot that. But she had been in a little film that my buddy Lucky McKee had shot, and he recommended her a lot. And Kelly Reichardt had recommended John from working with him on First Cow. And then we got the incredible Vondy Curtis Hall and Kathy Curtin, played kind of the older swingers in the film. And they were cast just 36 hours before. We had other people drop out, and this was we pretty much by this point needed to get a New York-based cast because we were shooting, well, number one, for budget reasons, you don't have to fly people across the country. But number two, we started shooting March 3rd, 2020. What could possibly go wrong in March of 2020? People were starting to get a little paranoid about this pandemic that, I'm sure will never hit the US, but of course it did. So we wound up actually shooting. We found out we were one of the last films shooting in North America. And I realized, wait a minute, what does everyone else know that we don't know? And so on our 11th day, we shut down, and we had 4 days left to go. And that kind of brings me to the next cast, the voice actors. So we had Bruce Campbell as Nixon, John Cryer as Haldeman, and Ted Raimi as General Al Haig. And so Bruce and John were actually the first two people cast in the film, because it was a really easy thing for them to say, oh yeah, I'll do a couple hours voiceover work sometime in the next year in post-production. Yeah, sure, Dan, whatever. And so it was easy to get them involved. But then once the pandemic hit, and we didn't know how long we would be on a pandemic pause or healthy hiatus, as I call it. But a couple months into it, I realized, you know what, we had been planning on doing the voice performances in post-production, but why don't we just do it now? Like, everyone has Zoom now. Most of the actors had decent microphones at their houses. Bruce was in Oregon. John was in LA. Ted Raimi, who Bruce kind of got him involved. He was in Canada. And so in I think June of 2020, that's when we did those voice performances over Zoom. And it was great, because it was a time, if you remember, that actors weren't acting. There was no films, no TV, no plays, nothing. So everyone's going kind of stir crazy. We were like, oh my gosh, we can spend a few hours doing, like you said, kind of a radio play within the movie. And it was really refreshing and invigorating for all of us to just be creative at that time when most people weren't. Meanwhile, I was editing the film, and we were doing a lot of music, because again, musicians around the world were kind of stuck. So we found a horn section in Mexico and a singer in Brazil. She splits her time between LA and Brazil, but so we could get all these great people to collaborate on the music. And then 6 months later, we went back, and by this point, the Screen Actors Guild and Directors Guild had the COVID safe protocols in place, and we were able to finish out those last 4 days, finish the film.
Were those last 4 days, those were back in New York?
Yeah. So they were, everyone was able to get back to the Silver Sands, the entire crew, the entire cast. It was those scenes where we shot with a lot more cast. So that's when Richard Kind was available. Lloyd Kaufman does a tiny cameo. I don't know if you remember seeing Lloyd in there. Mahia Abney, who'd been in Black Panther, she was out there. And then the three hippies, Sullivan Jones, who had just had done Slave Play on Broadway in New York, and the twins, Alana and Claire Saunders. So we actually had a fair number of people out there, and then Vondi Curtis Hall and Kathy Curtin, they came back for one more scene, and that they had left to do, and of course Willa and John.
The smaller cast and the kind of limited locations, you could almost reset this as a stage play at some time in the future.
Funny you should say that. We have actually been talking to a couple different theater companies about doing that, doing it as a play, which I think would be a lot of fun. Glad you agree.
You talked about the music, and I was not sure at first when I was listening to the film if it was period appropriate or if it was new versions of older songs or what was going on there. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
I have a couple kind of philosophical ideas about music and film. Number one, it's expensive on a low budget to do like needle drop music, and the temptation when doing a period film is to just let's put in the Rolling Stones and Creedence and pay $50,000 each or whatever. That's what Aaron Sorkin does, or Tarantino, or whoever. Just on a purely budgetary level, you can't afford that. But also, I feel like it's kind of a creative crutch too. It's more interesting and more specific to whatever your story is to do original music. So I have a great composer, Luis Guerra, who I worked with also on Bernard and Huey. And if you remember, Bernard and Huey played a bunch of festivals, like 30 around the world. And I had gone to the Sao Paulo International Festival with it, which I had an amazing time. It was before COVID, right? And this was right around the time we were starting to work on the script. So I kind of had Brazil a little bit on my mind. I saw a lot of music or heard a lot of music when I was down there. So I thought, why don't we come up with something that's period appropriate, which is to say late 60s, early 70s, because the characters, even though the film is set in 1974, the kind of swinger characters would still be listening to music that could have been from the late 60s or mid 60s even. we thought, why don't we just kind of go Brazil, go Brazil or go home, And we went with a mainly bossa nova kind of style of music, and specifically, there were a few songs that I wanted too. So I wrote the lyrics to the songs in English and then had a friend in Brazil translate them back into Portuguese. Because the other thing that I feel about music and film is that if you have lyrics in the same language as the dialogue, and if that's the same language that the audience speaks, so English in our case, it will intrinsically divide the attention span of the audience, which is not usually what you want. But if you have lyrics in a completely different language, say Portuguese, and everyone else is speaking English, then it just kind of, your mind filters it out. You just think of it as more instrumental music. And so this was a nice way of doing that, to have kind of, these Portuguese songs just kind of pop up within the film every now and again. And then Luis, knows a lot about Brazilian music, and he has a lot of Brazilian musician friends in LA. We actually live in kind of a Brazilian, Luis and I live close together, and we're in a bit of a Brazilian enclave in LA. So there's a lot of Brazilian restaurants around here. It's a lot of fun. It's great during World Cup season, But anyway, so we found this great singer, Caro Pieroto, who's Brazilian but lives in LA and kind of goes back and forth. And so she was able to sing in both Portuguese and English. But kind of the mandate for kind of our main theme song for Willa's character, Connie, I wanted to come up with a song that sort of felt a little bit like Girl from Ipanema, which was also recorded in Portuguese and English. So that we kind of use that as the model, but lyrically was a little bit more thematically like the theme from the Mary Tyler Moore theme song, being a bit more kind of early 70s feminist. And so that's what we came up with Brasilia Bella for that. During that 6-month gap, we had time. So we came up with a bunch of other songs, and we decided, well, why don't the hippies listen to kind of Tropicalia, which is sort of like Brazilian psychedelia music. And so we wrote some songs for them that were lyrically tied to Brasilia Bella and the other ones that we'd already done, the other bossa nova ones. And, and Luis says, and I trust him, the nice thing about bossa nova and Tropicalia, especially this combination of them, was that they kind of lent themselves really well tonally to, sometimes you can twist them into spy themes or thriller themes or comedic themes while still being true to the bossa nova beats and genre. So he had a lot of fun with working on that, and I'm happy to say the soundtrack just came out this week. And then we also did, because of course no one can see this on the radio or on a podcast, but we actually made a few flexi discs with 2 of our songs that we have available. We're going to be selling them in some of the live screenings. But yeah, these were actually made in a Czech printing plant in the Czech Republic that used to smuggle in rock and roll during the Cold War and print them onto medical x-rays.
Oh, right. I've heard of that.
Yeah. So, because we wanted to do like a big vinyl, soundtrack album, but there's a year-long backlog on printing vinyl these days. But this Czech plant was available, and we were like, well, I hope it doesn't get invaded by the Russians, but let's use that. So we got them out just in time.
That's fantastic. Is this your first soundtrack?
No, on my first film, Omaha the Movie, we did a soundtrack cassette tape on that one. This is back in the mid 90s, right? And I think, and then Open House, my real estate musical, that soundtrack is actually on Spotify. Remarkably enough, it is still floating around. I don't know who's getting residuals on that, but it is still floating around. And that, there's a whole long story with the Academy and the Best Original Musical category that we were aiming for in 2004 with that film. But yeah, so we had a soundtrack CD, and it's floating around digitally. So yeah, you can listen to that now.
Maybe one of these days Spotify will pay you all like 10 cents.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. There's not a lot of money in music, but it's fun.
I usually ask what was the most challenging thing about making a movie. And with this one, it feels like you've already talked about several of the biggest challenges. What was the most rewarding thing about making this one?
It was a really collaborative process. Everybody got along really great, really well. All the actors, all the cast and crew, we were all staying at this place, which was like winter camp. We'd wrap at the end of the night. No one had to drive home. No one had to go home tired. And we'd all sit around and play with Willa's dog that she brought out there and drink product placement wine and eat product placement Omaha steaks. We'd barbecue, most nights. So it was really like, I was like, wow, this is the civilized way to make a movie. You go back to your own little room, use your own bathroom, all of which, by the way, turned out to be like pretty good COVID protection too. Like when the COVID protocols came out, we're like, oh yeah, we're doing a lot of this stuff already. We're about as remotely isolated in a bubble as you can get. And honestly, I mean, having gone through this experience of the run up to COVID was kind of a bonding experience for all of us, because we had this shared paranoia about what was going on in the world, and were we going to be the last people that we ever saw again? And and which grip has the meatiest legs if we have to go full on, zombie cannibal island? And and it was really weird, because between the sets that we were on and what was going on in the world, we felt like Gilligan's Island on the set of The Brady Bunch. I mean, it was very, very surreal. But I think it really did kind of bond us all together. And in fact, when we shut down, about a third of the crew, so about 6 or 7 folks on the crew, kind of the single Brooklyn types, didn't have families to go back to, they stayed at the Silver Sands for 2 more months. And then my cinematographer, she never left. She was there for 6 months because it was so comfortable. So it was so nice out there. And Terry was lovely and let them all stay out there, and no one else was coming to hotels in those first couple of months. So it was really for them, a real bonding experience, really, for all of us, really. And then they were all there when I got back. And meanwhile, I learned to make sourdough over that 6 months. And so I had to quarantine for 2 weeks when I got back out there, because I was the one person from LA. But there were these great cabins, and I just baked sourdough every day for the 2 weeks, and then baked sourdough cinnamon rolls for the cast and crew, and they loved it. So it was a really good experience, and then creatively, even though, I mean, it's horrible when a global pandemic strikes when you're making a movie, and then we had to raise more money, which was not easy either. But meanwhile, I was editing the film, we had about 80% of it in the can. And then creatively, Daniel and I could look at the scenes that we still had left to shoot and kind of tweak the dialogue a little bit, and like, oh, okay, we need this little bit, we don't need that. Luis and I could write an extra song for Sullivan, who's on he's a day before he comes out there, he says, oh, should I bring my guitar? I was like, yeah, bring your guitar, man. And I was like, called up Luis that night. Luis, we need a song for Barry the hippie, So, and, we all cobbled that together, and the cast came back. They're like, hang on a second, is this a musical now? I was like, well, not quite, but it's leaning towards that way. So yeah, we just kind of had fun with it, and the actors just all really embraced their parts and the experience.
So when would you say the movie was completely finished?
We had the world premiere at the Woodstock Film Festival. So early October, like October 1st, 2021. And yeah, it was kind of finished right before that. Although that said, we just did a quick remix and a quick adjustment to get our MPA rating of a PG-13. So I had to go back into the sound mix a week ago, which was not so fun. But anyway, we got it done. Everyone's happy. We have PG-13. I like to, as soon as I finish a film, I like to start playing it at film festivals. I didn't want to wait around for a Sundance that was probably going to get canceled, and it did. Live screenings, all their live screenings got canceled. So when Woodstock invited us, I was like, yeah, let's go for it. Because the last fall was kind of this weird trough between the Delta variants and Omicron. And so there was like this 2.5 month window where film festivals were live and they were having live screenings. Some were still hybrid and some were still virtual, but we specifically aim for the live ones, because I, believe strongly film should be experienced on a big screen with an audience, all coughing on each other and getting sick. But so we played about 10 festivals in the fall. It was Woodstock, it was Anchorage, it was Rome, Georgia, but also Sao Paulo, Brazil. And Luis went down and represented the film there. And I went to Spain, in Gijón, Spain, for our European premiere, and Whistler, Canada. So we picked up some awards along the way, and we got distribution at around that time based on the success of the film from those early festivals from a London-based company. And then that kind of led to us getting a US-based company for the theatrical release. And then meanwhile, there was a kind of the spring trough where we played as many festivals, between Omicron and World War III. And, we've tried to fit in I went to the Manchester Film Festival in England and won a Best Director prize, which was great, and Barbados and a bunch of other US festivals as well. So, and then now we're trying to do the theatrical screening, between this Friday, May 27th. It opens in New York and LA and a couple other places. And then June 3rd, it really opens, 55 theaters, 60 theaters around the country, which is great because we have a nice little trough now between, sort of the BA2 variant and monkeypox, with the next time the theaters are going to get shut down. So see it while you can. This could be the last movie anyone of us ever sees in a movie theater. But it is in theaters only, at least for the first 5 weeks. And then it's getting a digital release after that. But yeah, it's like Memoria or Top Gun that way. Very similar to both those films.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can definitely see the similarities. It is funny that you come up with the idea back in 2016, and now it's still as appropriate as it was in 1974.
And that was part of my thinking too about doing any period film really, is that, but especially one with political resonance, is that it will hopefully, because if you try to do an indie film or even a studio film that is like super specific to what is going on right now with whoever's president and whatever scandals and impeachments are going on, you're never going to get it out in time. Like, circumstances are going to change just way too fast. But if you do a period film, especially one looking back 50 years, and this is June 17th is the 50th anniversary of Watergate, it's always going to have some version of resonance and relevance to whatever's going on right now in our own lives, but also not just in our lives, but also internationally. I mean, when we showed it in Brazil, they were all reading into it. Oh, this is just like Bolsonaro. And in Spain, they're like, oh yeah, this reminds us of Franco. And in Manchester, they were like, oh, this is just like Boris Johnson and the scandal he's going through now, like sort of this goofy scandal that's made worse by the cover up. It's like, so everyone can kind of read something different into it, which is fine. And, and the thing about this is you don't really need to know anything about Watergate going into it. I mean, I did, but my writing partner didn't. And so we did a lot of research for it, but it's, and it kind of takes off from these plausible things that were going on, but you don't have to do a lot of research before going in. So you can just go and have fun with it. And we've shown it to like really young audiences, college students and who don't know anything about Watergate, and they loved it. I think because they don't have preconceived ideas about what they think Watergate is from other movies and other TV shows.
You are never one to just kick back and sit on your laurels. So what are you working on as well?
Not much. I mean, I did during the same time of making the film, I also wrote a book, because why not? The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, the second edition. I'd written the first one right after my 2 films ago, Between Us. So I had a lot of material from Bernard and Huey, and also there's a whole chapter on 18 and a half in here, which is fun to like write a chapter about the making of a film and then put it in a book before the film even comes out. And then I was able to, the reason I have this mic is I recorded the audiobook. And so that actually just came out a couple months ago. Yeah, which is good because I get a bigger percentage of the cut on the audiobook than I do on the print edition. And because of the book, though, because it's through Focal Press and Routledge, which is an academic publisher, I wind up getting invited to speak at a lot of college campuses. So I do a lot of guest lecturing. I think in the fall, I'm going to be combining that with screenings of 18 and a half on campuses. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And then, as we talked about already, there's talk of turning it into a play. There's some chatter of maybe turning it into an episodic TV series. I mean, it's mainly me chattering about it, but, it could happen. So, yeah. And then the soundtrack. So this is one of those projects that I, and again, because we all still get along with each other, which does not always happen. And it's all original, IP as is the parlance in Hollywood to say, we can keep doing stuff with the world of 18 and a half. So why not? So I don't know what's next other than still plugging away at 18 and a half and then the Blu-ray and DVD are going to come out in September. It's going to start airing on airplanes in August all over the world. So that's starting to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of work I still need to do. We're still working on our New York State tax credit. There's a lot of accounting that goes into these films that nobody really talks about, and it's not fun. But if no one else does it, it's got to get done. And then who knows? Maybe award season. I don't know. this is gonna keep me busy for another year at least.
So for those people that want to see this theatrically, where's the best place for them to go to see where it's playing?
So the easiest thing is to go to our own website, which is the number 18, so 18, and then spelled out AND half movie, all spelled out .com. And we have a list of screenings. Or you can try to find your local listings or Fandango or Box Office Mojo, like one of those sites. They're not too accurate though, because they have like the big, multiplexes, but they don't have a lot of the art house screens. And we're kind of playing in a bit of both. So check your local listings, as they say. But you can go to our website for that. And then on social media, we're at 18.5 movie or at 18.5 on Twitter or 18.5 movie on Facebook and Instagram. But if you still can't find it, because it is a little complicated with the fraction, I don't know how Fellini did it with 8.5, but he did figure one thing out, which is that if you do start with a number, you're always at the head of the alphabet. So that's smart. So otherwise, just do search for me, Dan Mirvish, Mirvish, and then you can kind of piece it together where it's playing. But it's going to be in theaters, and I'm going to be running around doing a lot of Q&As. We've got a big premiere in DC next week, and premieres in Bi-Coastally Curious premieres in New York and LA this Friday. Depending on when people listen to this, because as I know, once you post it, they could listen this week or months from now and hopefully still be just as valuable. It'll be out there. So maybe by the time someone listens to it, it'll be on their Google contact lenses in 20 years or, some other weird thing. But I'm glad you liked it, Mike, because I know you've got a discerning eye. So I was like, I always get nervous sending you my films. I'm like, oh, wow, Mike's serious. He's the real thing. You have like British people on your podcast and stuff like that. So
that's how you can tell. It's the sign of quality.
I know it really is. Well, and you have a good microphone too. So
finally.
But thank you for having me on. And that I probably answered more questions than you need. You'll be cutting this down to quick 10 minutes, I'm sure.
October 15th in the year 1969, I was standing on Madison Avenue. Several thousand people passed marching with candles in hand, chanting a mournful melody too. Then all the women, they were dressed up in black and white. Then I saw the tears coming down their cheeks. These people were within their constitutional rights. Peace and love, they're trying to sing. They were singing Uncle Sam and this useless war in Vietnam. Tell us what you're fighting for. We want you to bring back women from Vietnam. We say to have some consideration, Uncle Sam. Get women out Vietnam. We want you to end the murders in Vietnam. We say to stop the killing in Vietnam, Uncle Sam. We want back women. So I stopped a middle-aged woman to question her on the reason for this Vietnam moratorium. She said, I will explain everything to you, Lord Reiner. My husband was killed down there by a Viet Cong. But then she said, I can't blame the Viet Cong for killing my man. The only person that I really got to blame is Uncle Sam, because he have no right to be fighting in that country, and she intend to stop him from destroying humanity. Then she gone back, Uncle Sam, and end this useless war in Vietnam. Tell us what you're fighting for. We want you to bring back women from Vietnam. We say to have some consideration, Uncle Sam. Get women out Vietnam. We want you to stop the murders in Vietnam. We say end the killing in Vietnam, Uncle Sam. We want back women. While Uncle Sam was watching everything on TV inside, the radio broadcast the news so he will hear. But all this time he was only thinking of his political pride, while human blood is spilling over there. So many thousand and thousand of lives have gone in vain, and not to mention the grief of their family. So the only way we could stop him from causing more pain is to bring back our men. We said to bring them back immediately, and they gone back, Uncle Sam. End this useless war in Vietnam. Tell us what you're fighting for. We want you bring back women from Vietnam. We say to have some consideration, Uncle Sam. Get women out Vietnam. We want you to stop this war now in Vietnam. We say to start the escalation, Uncle Sam. We want back women.